She met Morgan Freeman's gaze and coldly declared, "People like you don't belong in this car." From 2 rows behind, Keanu Reeves rose and silently dismantled her world. Before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories, and also tell us where in the world are you watching this story from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. The platform at Grand Central shimmered beneath the amber hue of early evening. A hush clung to the air, as if the city itself had paused to witness the departure of something rare and grand. On track 7, the silver horizon stood idle, its polished chrome siding gleaming like a river of steel beneath the setting sun. This wasn't just any train. It was a palace in motion, a monument to old-world luxury still clinging to breath in a digital age. Near the rear, tucked away from the rest, waited the Elysian car, a carriage reserved for a particular class of traveler, those with money, prestige, or legacy. Morgan Freeman didn't arrive with fanfare. He entered quietly, the way mist drifts into a valley before dawn. A thick overcoat wrapped around his frame, a scarf tucked neatly beneath his collar, and a soft-brimmed hat tilted forward. His footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. A porter approached, offering to take his bag, but Morgan waved him off with a gentle smile. In one hand, he held a simple, leather-bound journal. In the other, a gold-plated train ticket, Legacy Lifetime Pass, embossed with 3 initials and a discreet national seal. He boarded without needing directions. Inside the Elysian car, the air was steeped in old cedar and quiet wealth. Velvet-lined armchairs nestled beneath Art Deco sconces. The room buzzed with low murmurs, the tinkle of glassware, the mellow drift of jazz piano. Conversations were muted but rich, their content often older than some of the passengers. Most of the occupants were already seated, postures rigid with confidence and pedigree. Few noticed Morgan's arrival. A couple glanced up, then returned to their champagne. Others nodded politely, not recognizing the man beneath the scarf, and certainly not the decades of cinema etched into the quiet strength of his voice. But one pair of eyes did not look away. Regina Whitmore watched him with a gaze colder than curiosity. She sat poised behind jeweled glasses, her stare unblinking as Morgan passed. To her, he moved like an uninvited guest, like a stray animal wandering into a drawing room. At the back of the car, Keanu Reeves sat alone by a window. He wore a black shirt, worn boots, and had a dog-eared copy of the Brothers Karamazov resting half-read in his lap. His hair was unkempt, his beard uneven, his silence complete. No one noticed him either. Morgan found his seat, row 3, window, and settled without ceremony. He placed his journal on the tray table, leaned back, and closed his eyes just as the train gave a gentle lurch forward. The journey had begun, and though no one in that car realized it yet, something else had begun too, something unspoken, coiled just beneath the surface. A quiet collision was underway, between arrogance and history, between dignity and denial, between a man everyone thought they could overlook, and a truth no one would be able to ignore. Not by the time they reached Chicago. Not when the silence broke. Regina Whitmore did not need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence filled space the way perfume does, slow, sweet, and invasive. Draped in a silver shawl embroidered with hand-stitched orchids, her posture was flawless, sculpted by generations of etiquette and legacy galas. Her fingers, layered with heirloom rings, drummed against the rim of a crystal flute filled with Dom Perignon. As the train sliced westward through the Hudson dusk, she took immediate note of Morgan Freeman the moment he entered. And she did not like it. Her eyes narrowed behind pale blue lenses as she watched the man in the weathered scarf and kind eyes claim the seat across the aisle. It wasn't his manners that offended her, nor his stillness. It was the simple fact of him, the incongruity of his presence in this space, which didn't fit the story she told herself about what the Elysian car represented. So she decided to rewrite that story. She leaned slightly toward Jameson, the head steward. He stood nearby in a charcoal vest, every movement refined, every word dipped in honey and vinegar. Regina whispered just loud enough. "Jameson, dear. I believe there's been a mix-up. That gentleman, is he in the correct section?" Jameson blinked, momentarily unsure if he'd misheard. "Pardon me, ma'am?" She smiled graciously, the kind of smile that hid claws. "Well, this is the legacy cabin, And I'm sure he's perfectly lovely, but surely you understand, appearances matter. Jameson hesitated. Every instinct in him urged him to leave the man alone. But Regina Whitmore was not just any passenger, she was old money. A donor. The kind of woman who could turn silence into scandal. Across the aisle, Morgan glanced up from his journal but said nothing. Of course, he heard everything. Jameson cleared his throat and approached. His voice was low, apologetic, but the shame still stung. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but would you mind confirming your ticket again? Likely a minor clerical error." Morgan looked at him for a long moment, long enough for the weight of it to land, then slowly reached into his coat and retrieved his ticket. A gold-edged pass embossed with his name, signed by the board of the National Rail Preservation Trust. Jameson examined it, his face flushing as he turned back to Regina. "His credentials are more than valid, ma'am." Regina didn't blink. She offered a tight-lipped smile instead. "Ah, one of those honorary things, then. Quite moving." In the rear, Keanu Reeves didn't turn his head, but his fingers stopped flipping pages. His breath caught, just slightly. He wasn't sure what bothered him more, the way Regina spoke or the way Morgan didn't respond. Outside, the city lights slipped away. Inside, something colder settled into their place. The Elysian car settled into its rhythm, a metronome of wealth. Soft, self-assured. Crystal clinked against crystal. Dinner menus were perused like investment portfolios. The train hummed beneath it all, trained, like its passengers, to move only with grace. Regina Whitmore was now in full bloom. Her voice, rich with cultivated poise, spilled across the table like vintage wine. To her left, a publishing magnate. To her right, an art broker who hadn't looked up since Albany. But Regina didn't need an audience, just a stage. "I suppose," she began, swirling her drink with a gleaming spoon, "we shouldn't be surprised anymore. Standards change. One must learn to tolerate certain adjustments. Inclusion, I believe they call it now." Her tone wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. In the Elysian car, cruelty whispered behind silk gloves. Across the aisle, Morgan kept writing in his notebook. His pen moved slowly, like a man who thought carefully before each word. He made no eye contact, no protest, just quiet presence. Which, of course, irritated Regina even more. She leaned closer to the art broker, her voice low but deliberate. "I once told my late husband, when exclusivity dies, so does elegance. And now, here we are." The art broker grunted vaguely. Keanu Reeves looked up from his book. His eyes lingered on Regina for a beat, long enough for her to feel it. She met his gaze briefly, dismissively. The kind of look that wrote people off in a single blink. He returned to his book. But he wasn't reading anymore. Morgan said nothing. His writing grew tighter, more compressed, like something inside him was being held in. Jameson passed by again, this time with a tray of petit fours. He paused beside Morgan. "Would you care for dessert, sir?" he asked softly. Morgan looked up and smiled. "No, thank you." Regina chuckled lightly. "Ah, discipline. I respect that. Though it's always such a shame to deny oneself life's finer tastes. Especially while one still can." The words were a barb wearing perfume, a slight disguised as civility. Morgan nodded. "Sometimes, less is enough." Regina's smile faltered. Briefly. In the back corner, Keanu Reeves closed his book completely. He watched now, not passively, but with the quiet stillness of someone who had lived through moments like this too many times. He knew what was happening. Not just the words, but the weight behind them. The looks. The gestures. The careful exclusions dressed as tradition. Something stirred in him. He didn't rise. Didn't speak. But the room felt it. The shift. The air changed. The silence became something else. Not absence, but intention. Outside, the train sped through the dark. Inside, a storm was beginning. And not even Regina Whitmore knew it yet. Dinner was served just past Syracuse, where the train sliced through the darkness, its steady hum a soft accompaniment to the evening's unfolding. The moment was one of mechanical precision. Linen tablecloths, starched and crisp, unfurled with such grace that they seemed to hover for a brief second before settling onto the polished wood tables. Each movement was choreographed, the waiter's steps as synchronized as a well-rehearsed dance. Wine flowed without hesitation, each glass filled to the perfect rim, the ruby liquid catching the candlelight as it passed between hands. The scent of rosemary, lamb, and roasted vegetables hung in the air, a heady perfume that added warmth to the cool, mechanical environment of the dining car. The delicate crackle of the fire in the small stoves added a crackling contrast to the hum of the train. Waiters in white gloves and black vests moved like ghosts through the aisle, silently serving, silently observing, as if the whole train held its breath in collective admiration. Morgan sat quietly in his corner, his journal now closed, though his fingers rested gently upon the leather cover as though it might suddenly spring to life. His eyes, though slightly narrowed in concentration, appeared to be somewhere far beyond the flickering candle flames. Moonlight poured past his window, casting silver across the black fields outside. It reflected on the smooth surface of the table and pooled like liquid silver in the corners of the car. His face remained an enigma, framed in the soft glow of the candlelight, his beard catching shadows in the flickering light. His lips were pursed in contemplation, and though the air was thick with conversation, he had not spoken a word. Regina Whitmore, seated across from him, felt the oppressive silence of his stillness weigh heavily upon her. Her glass of Bordeaux caught the light as she lifted it, the deep red swirling like liquid rubies. She felt a slight tremor in her fingers, a ripple of tension that echoed through her, but she controlled it with practiced precision. She had made the conversation the centerpiece of the evening, drawing every eye to her like a sun commanding the orbit of her satellites. Her wit, her charm, her effortless elegance, all of it had served as the gravitational force for the entire room. But now, in the unspoken presence of Morgan, the atmosphere shifted. For 2 hours, she had been the star, the queen of the room, but with no sound, no word, he had quietly taken the place beside her at the center of attention. She felt it in the hush, in the silent glances that passed between the others. Whispers barely concealed behind napkins. A slow, imperceptible turning of their focus. It didn't just annoy her, it enraged her. She could feel the pull of her temper winding tighter, her hand tightening around the Bordeaux stem. It was as if he were absorbing the attention without effort, and all her meticulous control, her carefully curated dominance over the room, was slipping away without a single utterance from him. His quietness spoke volumes, volumes she could not interpret, and that made it all the more maddening. With a deep breath, she stood, her movement deliberate and fluid, the wine glass raised like a scepter in her delicate fingers. She moved down the aisle with slow elegance, the click of her heels marking the cadence of her steps. The other diners turned their eyes toward her, their gaze briefly lifting from their plates, and she seized the moment with a practiced smile, a subtle tilt of her head. "I do so enjoy trains," she said aloud, her voice carrying with an ease that only she could summon. She let the words linger, then added with deliberate slowness, "They remind us of a time when travel meant character, not chaos." She paused, letting the sentence hang in the air for just a moment longer, her gaze briefly meeting Morgan's without emotion, before turning to face the others, expecting to command their attention once more. She turned as if to pass Morgan's seat, and then it happened. Her elbow jutted out just slightly. The red wine arced through the air, a blooming splash of crimson that landed with sharp finality on Morgan's right sleeve. It soaked into the fabric in slow, winding streaks, like blood seeping into old stone. Gasps rose from 3 corners of the car. Regina froze mid-step, then turned with dramatic flair, one hand against her chest. "Oh goodness," she said, her voice breathy with feigned concern. "I'm so terribly clumsy these days. Please forgive me, sir. I do hope that isn't real cashmere." Morgan looked down at the stain, then up at her. For a moment, the air between them felt like it might snap from the tension. Then, without a word, he reached for his napkin, dabbed the sleeve once, twice, and then placed the cloth calmly across his lap. "No harm done," he said, his voice steady. But Keanu Reeves was already standing. He crossed the car silently, without fanfare, without hesitation. His boots tapped softly against the polished wood floor. When he reached Morgan's table, He bent to retrieve the fallen napkin near the seat and offered it back with a quiet nod. Then he turned to Regina. "You didn't spill wine," he said softly, though there was steel beneath the words. "You spilled the last ounce of grace you had." Regina's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flashed. "I beg your pardon." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying her. "No, you don't. That's the point." The car went still, not because anyone told it to, but because everyone felt it. Like the moment before thunder when you realize the storm isn't coming. It's already here. Outside, the moon slipped behind a cloud. Inside, every eye now saw with clarity. And some, for the first time, saw Keanu Reeves. Regina's lips parted in disbelief. "Messer?" she asked, one brow arching. "Reeves," he replied simply. A ripple moved through the car. Jameson, the steward, who had just stepped in with a tray of chocolate soufflés, stopped mid-step. A businessman near the front leaned forward. Someone whispered, "Wait, is that really?" But Keanu didn't seem to hear them. His attention remained fully on Regina. Not aggressive, not performative, just resolute. "You're used to people stepping aside," he said, voice low but unshakable. "Used to the room adjusting to your discomfort. Used to never being questioned." Regina gave a soft scoff, brushing invisible dust from her shawl. "I'm used to standards, Mr. Reeves." "There's a difference." "No," he replied, quieter now. "There really isn't." Morgan remained seated, his expression unchanged. But his gaze was lifted now, watching Keanu with something close to respect. "You see," Keanu continued, "this train, this car, was built to honor a time when travel meant something. But the only thing truly timeless about that era was how easily dignity was treated like an option." Jameson finally cleared his throat. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu didn't turn. "Only the kind that gets ignored," he said, "until someone bleeds." Regina let out a dry laugh. "Are we really going to make a scene over a little clumsy wine?" Keanu glanced at Morgan's sleeve. That wasn't wine. That was a warning dressed as etiquette. And it's not the first. The car had gone silent now. "You know what I've seen?" Keanu said, eyes still locked on Regina. "I've seen people in billion-dollar boardrooms treat janitors like ghosts. I've watched servers apologize for their existence. And I've seen men like him," he nodded toward Morgan, "smile through insults so subtle they hide behind the word tradition." Regina opened her mouth again, but the words wouldn't come. "You think you're defending standards," Keanu continued, his tone softer now, almost kind. "But all you're doing is protecting the parts of yourself too fragile to live in a world where power doesn't equal worth." No one moved. Even the train seemed to slow. Then, quietly, Morgan spoke. Just 2 words. "Thank you." Keanu turned. Their eyes met, man to man, artist to legend, silence to silence. And for the first time since Morgan had boarded, someone else had stepped forward to carry the weight he'd been shouldering alone. The soufflés went cold. The wine lost its flavor. And Regina Whitmore had nothing left to say. She sank slowly back into her seat, lips pursed so tightly her lipstick began to crack. She picked up her napkin and dabbed at the corner of her mouth, not out of necessity, but to maintain control. It was the only gesture she had left. Across from her, Morgan returned to his seat. He didn't speak again. He didn't have to. Because now, the car had shifted. The businessman at the front who had ignored Morgan earlier leaned toward his wife, whispering wide-eyed. A young woman in a burgundy dress near the rear began scrolling frantically through her phone, her lips parted in disbelief. Jameson, tray still in hand, stood frozen, uncertain whether to serve or retreat. "Did he say Reeves?" someone murmured. "Yes," another replied, eyes narrowing. "Keanu Reeves." Gasps, low and reverent, spread like steam through the room. And then, from the far corner of the Elysian car, a voice said what everyone else had just realized. "That's Morgan Freeman." 3 words. 3 words that broke the dam. The whispers surged, then fell silent again, stunned and heavy. The kind of silence that only arrives when people realize they've made a mistake, in full view of others. Eyes turned to Morgan, some with awe, others with guilt, and a few with that shallow reverence that only surfaces once reputation has done the work their respect never did. At last, Jameson stepped forward, voice trembling with decorum. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry. I wasn't aware." Morgan looked up, calm as ever. "You were aware," he said softly. "You just didn't look." Jameson swallowed, then turned slowly to Regina. "Mrs. Whitmore, I believe an apology is in order." Regina flinched, the words striking her like a slap. She steadied her glass, cleared her throat, and gave a brittle, painted-on smile. "Well, now that the mystery is solved, of course I meant no offense. It was all just a misunderstanding." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "The misunderstanding wasn't who he is. It's what you assumed he wasn't." Regina's hand trembled as she set her wine down. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That's when Morgan turned slightly, addressing the entire car for the first time. "You didn't fail because you didn't recognize me," he said, voice low, resonant. "You failed because you didn't care to." There was no anger, just clarity, just truth. And in that moment, the silence in the Elysian car became a mirror. One by one, heads lowered, not just in shame, but in recognition. They had never learned his name because they never believed they needed to. But now, they would never forget it. The doors at the far end of the car hissed open, and the conductor stepped inside. He was composed, gray slacks, brass buttons gleaming, cap tilted just right. He was the image of railroad order. But even he paused as he surveyed the room, the silence, the tension, the sea of shifting eyes landing between Morgan Freeman and Regina Whitmore. He approached, adjusting his jacket as he moved. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, professional but cautious. Regina seized the moment. "Yes," she exhaled with relief. "Thank goodness. I'd like to file a formal." But the conductor held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "I've already received a report from the control car," he said. "Some passengers flagged the incident via our onboard app. Footage was reviewed." He turned to Morgan, then to Keanu, and reached into his breast pocket. "I'd like to make something clear." He withdrew a black envelope, sealed in gold. "Mr. Freeman," he said, stepping forward, "on behalf of the Silver Horizon and the National Rail Preservation Trust, thank you for traveling with us." He handed the envelope to Morgan with both hands, a gesture of respect. Regina blinked. "Wait, what is that?" Morgan opened the envelope with quiet grace, revealing a letter on thick parchment. Keanu tilted his head slightly, watching. The conductor cleared his throat. "For those who don't know," he said, addressing the car, "this train, the Elysian car, exists thanks in large part to Mr. Freeman's contributions to our historical restoration fund. He's not just a guest. He's a founding patron of this very car." The words landed harder than any wine spill. Regina paled. Her lips moved, but nothing came. Morgan folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and nodded once. "Thank you." Keanu stepped forward slowly, like he was guided by something unspoken. He turned to Regina, and in a voice neither cruel nor cruelly soft, he said, "Not to wound, just to remind." He motioned around them. "You thought he didn't belong here, that he'd stumbled into your world. But you were wrong." He looked around the car. "We're all just passengers riding through his." That's when Morgan turned slightly, addressing the entire car for the first time. "You didn't fail because you didn't recognize me," he said, voice low, resonant. "You failed because you didn't care to." There was no anger, just clarity, just truth. And in that moment, the silence in the Elysian car became a mirror. One by one, heads lowered, not just in shame, but in recognition. They had never learned his name because they never believed they needed to. But now, they would never forget it. The doors at the far end of the car hissed open, and the conductor stepped inside. He was composed, gray slacks, brass buttons gleaming, cap tilted just right. He was the image of railroad order. But even he paused as he surveyed the room. The silence, the tension, the sea of shifting eyes landing between Morgan Freeman and Regina Whitmore. He approached, adjusting his jacket as he moved. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, professional but cautious. Regina seized the moment. "Yes," she exhaled with relief. "Thank goodness. I'd like to file a formal." But the conductor held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "I've already received a report from the control car," he said. "Some passengers flagged the incident via our onboard app. Footage was reviewed." He turned to Morgan, then to Keanu, and reached into his breast pocket. "I'd like to make something clear." He withdrew a black envelope, sealed in gold. "Mr. Freeman," he said, stepping forward, "on behalf of the Silver Horizon and the National Rail Preservation Trust, thank you for traveling with us." He handed the envelope to Morgan with both hands, a gesture of respect. Regina blinked. "Wait. What is that?" Morgan opened the envelope with quiet grace, revealing a letter on thick parchment. Keanu tilted his head slightly, watching. The conductor cleared his throat. "For those who don't know," he said, addressing the car, "this train, the Elysian car, exists thanks in large part to Mr. Freeman's contributions to our historical restoration fund. He's not just a guest. He's a founding patron of this very car." The words landed harder than any wine spill. Regina paled. Her lips moved, but nothing came. Morgan folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and nodded once. "Thank you." Keanu stepped forward slowly, like he was guided by something unspoken. He turned to Regina, and in a voice neither cruel nor cruelly soft, he said, "Not to wound, just to remind." He motioned around them. "You thought he didn't belong here, that he'd stumbled into your world. But you were wrong." He looked around the car. "We're all just passengers riding through his." Morgan adjusted the cuff of his jacket, the faint stain on his sleeve still visible. Keanu leaned in slightly and said just loud enough to be heard, "Some people think class is money. But it's really how you carry yourself when nobody hands it to you." Morgan smiled faintly. "And how you respond when someone tries to take it away." The train pressed on into the dark, but something deeper had already arrived. Dawn spilled through the windows like golden dust. The Silver Horizon had crossed into Ohio during the night, slicing through sleepy farmland, iron bridges, and mist-veiled hills. But inside the Elysian car, something more profound than morning light had taken root. Reflection. Morgan Freeman sat quietly by the window. The teacup beside him sat untouched since Cleveland. He stared into the rolling fields beyond, but his eyes weren't looking outward. They were somewhere deeper. Keanu Reeves sat across the aisle now, legs crossed, sipping plain black coffee from a ceramic mug. The world had returned to its rhythm. But between the two men lingered a pause, something sacred, something earned. Then Morgan spoke. "Funny," he said, his voice a murmur. "I've narrated the lives of kings and killers, but this might be the first time I watched people realize a voice doesn't need a spotlight, just space to speak." Keanu looked up. "You didn't speak," he said, "and still, you said everything." Morgan smiled. "Sometimes silence is louder, when you've earned the right to shout, but don't." Around them, the passengers moved with new energy. Gentler, more aware. Jameson polished the silverware with reverent care. The conductor passed by and offered Morgan a nod, one filled with respect the night had carved into him. From the dining alcove, the young man with the phone approached again. "No camera this time. My mom texted after the video went viral," he said shyly. "She said she cried. Said she recognized your voice before your face." Morgan chuckled, warm and low. "Mothers always know." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. A simple touch, but it meant more than applause. As the final breakfast call echoed through the car, the train began to slow. Chicago. Morgan gathered his coat and scarf, sliding his leather journal back into his bag. Keanu stood as well. "You heading all the way to San Francisco?" Morgan asked. Keanu shook his head. "This is my stop." They walked in silence toward the vestibule. At the door, Keanu turned to face Morgan one last time. "You know," he said, voice steady, "if it had been anyone else, I'm not sure I would have stood up." He paused. "But you reminded me who I wanted to be in that moment." Morgan's gaze held his. Then something good came from something ugly. Keanu nodded, lips pressed together. Then he reached into his coat and handed Morgan something. A worn, dog-eared copy of the Brothers Karamazov. "Chapter 4, he said. "The part about quiet souls and thunder." Morgan accepted the book with both hands, as though it weighed more than paper. The train hissed. The doors opened. Keanu stepped out onto the platform. As the train pulled away, Morgan sat once again by the window. He opened the book, turned to chapter 4, and smiled. The last line on the page read, "And some men, when they choose to stand, make the whole room rise with them." And in the golden silence that followed, the train carried more than passengers. It carried memory. The hum of the tracks beneath them seemed to amplify the weight of what had just passed. An unspoken confrontation, a delicate shift in the balance of the room. The soft flicker of candlelight and the quiet clink of fine china could not mask the tension that had woven its way through the car. The train, a moving vessel of luxury and privilege, now became a vessel of something far deeper: history. It was not just about what had occurred, but about the quiet reverberations of an encounter that would be remembered long after the train had reached its final destination. What happened on that train wasn't about a spilled drink. Not at all. The drink was a mere catalyst, a small incident that could have been ignored or easily brushed aside. No, it was about assumptions. The kind of assumptions that arise from centuries of conditioning, of unspoken hierarchies. It was about power, the kind that dances invisibly in the air, yet is felt by everyone in the room. It is the power that one holds simply by being, by occupying space, by existing in a room that, in a moment, turns against the person who is not deemed worthy of equal consideration. It was about dignity too, the quiet, unshakable strength of it. Morgan Freeman didn't need to defend himself. His mere presence was a defense in itself. It wasn't a challenge to anyone else, but a reaffirmation of his own worth, his own identity. His silence was not weakness, but a quiet assertion of self-respect that rendered any insult null and void. He didn't flinch when the moment called for reaction, because his silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. It said, without words, that he had nothing to prove to anyone in the room. And Keanu Reeves didn't stand because he was famous, though his name carried weight. He stood because he knew that silence, in the face of cruelty, is complicity. He understood that in moments like these, it is not enough to remain neutral. One must act. He wasn't acting to defend his friend, but to defend what was right, to stand in solidarity. His decision wasn't rooted in celebrity, but in the quiet understanding that human dignity is a cause worth standing for, no matter who you are. It was a moment of moral clarity. Action over inaction. In the end, true class isn't about where you sit or the titles you carry. It's about how you treat the people who were never invited to sit beside you. It's about recognizing the humanity in others, regardless of status, background, or circumstance. True class is in the way you elevate those around you, especially when they are not in a position to elevate themselves. It's in standing up for those who may never have the opportunity to stand beside you at all. Have you ever seen someone stand when it truly mattered? Or maybe you were the one who refused to stay silent. Share your story in the comments. We read every single one. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If this story moved you, hit like. Tap subscribe. Follow us for more stories that prove. Sometimes, the quietest moments echo the loudest.